Chapter 1. You will not burp. You will not burp. The whole time George Brown was asleep, his best friend Alex's voice kept ringing in his ears. Alex had slept over, and right before the boys went to bed, Alex had recorded the message on George's MP3 player. You will not burp. You will not burp. Ring! George's alarm clock went off. It was time to get up for school. Turn it off. Too loud, Alex grumbled. He buried his head under his pillow. George hit the snooze button and rolled over. He never got up the first time the alarm clock rang. Snore. George's nose buzzed. You will not burp. You will not burp. Alex's voice repeated over and over. Ring! The alarm clock sounded again. Boys, are you up? George's mother shouted from downstairs. Yes, ma'am, Alex called back to her. He sat up in his bed and rubbed his eyes. Okay, now George really had to get up. He kicked off the covers and took off the headphones. How do you feel? Alex asked him. Any bubbles in your belly? George looked at Alex in the cot that was across the room. George wasn't usually allowed to have sleepovers on school nights, but Alex's parents had gone out of town. It was almost like having a brother, for one night anyway. George sat very still and waited for his tummy to start rumbling. Nope, George said happily. All quiet down there. That's a good sign, Alex said. When I read in that science magazine about planting ideas in people's heads while they were sleeping, I figured maybe it would work on your burps. George frowned when Alex said the word burp. George had wanted to keep his burping a secret. But Alex was smart. He'd figured out that George was hiding something. Something really, really awful. A magical super burp. Alex was good at keeping secrets, so he was still the only person besides George who knew about George's problem. And lucky for George, Alex liked solving problems. The super burp was the worst thing that had happened to him since he'd moved to Beaverbrook. It was the worst thing in his whole life. It all started on George's first day at Edith B. Sugarman Elementary School. George's dad was in the Army, and his family moved around a lot. So there always seemed to be some new school where he was the new kid. But this time, George had promised himself that things were going to be different. He was turning over a new leaf. No more pranks. No more class clown. He wasn't going to get into any trouble anymore, like he had at all his old schools. He was going to raise his hand before he spoke. And he wasn't going to make funny faces or goof on his teachers behind their backs. That last promise had been really hard for George to keep, especially because his teacher, Mrs. Kelly, looked a little like a totem pole and did weird things like yodel and dance the hula right in the middle of class. At the end of his first day, George had managed to stay out of trouble. Not only had he not been sent to the principal's office, he didn't even know who the principal was. But you didn't have to be a math whiz like Alex to figure out how many friends being a well-behaved, not-so-funny kid will get you. 0. Zilch. None. That night, George's parents took him out to Ernie's Ice Cream Emporium. While they were sitting outside and George was finishing his root beer float, a shooting star flashed across the sky. So George made a wish. I want to make kids laugh, but not get into trouble. Unfortunately, the star was gone before George could finish the wish. So only half came true. The first half. A minute later, George had a funny feeling in his belly. It was like there were hundreds of tiny bubbles bouncing around in there. The bubbles bounced up and down and all around.